What's up, class? Basically today we're gonna go over the European and North African theater of World War II. This is for our 11th grade United States history class. In prelude to the United States involvement in Europe. After World War One, a series of agreements were made to ensure post-war stability in Europe. Germany did not abide by these agreements. They annexed territory in Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, and eventually invaded Poland in 1939, starting World War II. Hitler at the same time was systematically killing anyone he proved to be undesirable. The list included Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, black and Slavic peoples. America stayed isolationist in the war but condemned Hitler and provided financial support to the Allies in Europe. United States entry into World War II. After Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the United States joined World War II. Thousands of men were drafted. The United States and were drafted and a lot joined too. So there was a lot of people that were in there. A few million men were in the armed forces at this time. The United States would be aligning with allies, which included France, Belgium, Britain, Russia, China, and Australia. To add a few, there's much more to this list, but we don't. For time's sake, we'll just keep it to these few. Um, oh, and a big one I'm forgetting, the Soviet Union. It's not on there, but it's a big one. A large number of the United States servicemen, mainly the United States Army, would serve in Europe. North Africa campaign, invasion of North Africa. After failed negotiations with Stalin to open up a second front in France, the United States, along with Britain, invaded Italy, invaded Italian and Nazi-controlled North Africa. The North African campaign began in 1940 and the United States joined in 1942. French were on both sides, both the Allied and Axis side. The Vichy France, which was the Axis side, and Free France was the Allied side. After a few years of combat, the North Africa campaign ended in May of 1943, and this would lead to the preparation and the pretty much useless campaign in Italy. This would lead to it. In the North Africa campaign, 2,715 Americans were dead. About 6,700 missing, 6,441 missing, and the British lost around 35,000 casualties, and the French had 16,000 dead on the Free France side. The German dead was 18,594. The Italian dead was 1,367. Um, and France, the Vichy French is not on there, but they lost around a couple thousand. The Italian campaign. From January 1943 to May of 1944, the Allies embarked on a bloody campaign in Italy. It started with the invasion of Sicily, and the battle would persist in the heart of Italy. Heavy casualties on both sides were received from the Battle of Anzio, Monte Cassino, and Bernhardt Line. At the Battle of Monte Cassino, there was an old cathedral there that was there for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it was destroyed in fighting, which is really sad, and has lost the annals of history. The front was heavily criticized by Stalin and other countries because it did little to damage the Nazis, and in a sense was a waste of time and lives. The Americans lost about 100,000 troops on Italy and had 60,000 wounded. Um, that should say 25,000, not 125,000 died during the campaign. 60,000 wounded. German and Italian had 400,000 dead, with a million captured and 600 with a million. Fuck. What's going on, class? So basically, we're going to talk about the European and North African theaters of World War II. And this is important because we talked about in our last video the Pacific side. So this time we're going to talk about the European side. Prelude to the United States involvement in Europe. After World War I, a series of agreements were made to ensure post-war stability in Europe. Germany did not abide by these agreements. They annexed territory in the Rhineland, Czechoslovakia, and eventually invaded Poland in 1939. Hitler at the time was systematically killing anyone he proved to be undesirable. Lists included Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, black and Slavic peoples. America stayed isolationist in the war but condemned Hitler and provided financial support to the Allies in Europe. United States entry into World War II. After Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941, the United States joined World War II. Thousands of men were joined and were also drafted. More men in this war were drafted than were in Vietnam, which is a misconception that everybody joined willingly. There's a lot of people that were drafted. The United States would join aligning with the Allies, which included France, Belgium, Britain, Russia, China, and Australia. That should say Soviet Union instead of Russia, because they were in Russia at the time. Large number of United States servicemen, mainly the United States Army, would serve in Europe. North Africa campaign, invasion of North Africa. After failed negotiations with Stalin to open up a second front in France, the United States, along with Britain, invaded Italy, Italian and Nazi-controlled North Africa. The North African campaign began in 1940, and the United States joined in 1942. French were on both sides, Allied and Axis, and Vichy France was the Axis side, and Free France was the Allied side. After years of combat, the North African campaign ended in May of 1943. The United States lost 2,715 men and had 6,441 missing or wounded. The British in total had 35,478 casualties. I couldn't find specific dead numbers for them, so it just gave me the casualties. So this includes dead and wounded. Um, Free France had 16,000 dead. The Germans had 18,594 dead. The Italians lost 1,367. Italian campaign from January 1943 to May of 1945. The Allies embarked on a bloody campaign in Italy. Started with the invasion of Italy, and the battles would persist in the heart of Italy. Heavy casualties on both sides were received. The battles of Anzio, Monte Cassino, and Barnhead Line. Um, the Battle of Monte Cassino, there was an old cathedral at the hilltop, and it was destroyed. It was hundreds and hundreds of years old, and it was lost to the annals of history. The front was very heavily criticized by Stalin and other countries because it did little to damage the Nazis, and in a sense was a waste of lives and time. Americans lost 25,000 dead and 60,000 wounded. Germans and Italians combined lost about 400,000 men that were killed, a million that were captured, and 60,000 that were wounded. Mussolini would be killed, and his body would be displayed in public in 1945. D-Day invasion. After 2 years of FDR's resistance to open up a second front in Europe, the Americans finally agreed to land on the shores of Normandy. It was the largest amphibious invasion force in modern history. Almost 2 million soldiers, hundreds of battleships, and billions of dollars worth of supplies. The night of, paratroopers would land behind enemy lines at night with the Allied forces. Would land behind the enemy lines, while other Allied forces in the morning would land on the beaches of Juneau, Omaha, Sword, and Utah. They would come under heavy fire from German artillery. Um, you could see this on both sides with the paratroopers if you ever watched the series Band of Brothers, which is really good, and Saving Private Ryan shows really what D-Day was like on Omaha Beach. By the end of the month, Allies would successfully reclaim the Atlantic Wall and liberate France at a heavy price. The Atlantic Wall is the whole coastline of France up through Norway down that whole area. They reclaimed it. Um, D-Day American dead was 6,800 people died, 1,200 of those were paratroopers, 10,000 were wounded. D-Day German dead was 9,000, 30,000 wounded, and 100,000 captured. Operation Market Garden. On September 7th, 1944, the Allies embarked on an unsuccessful mission to encircle the heart of the German industry called the Ruhr in hopes of cutting off supplies to Germany. It was broken down into two parts. Market, which would paratroopers would land in, seize bridges and other terrain, and Garden, which were forces on the ground. At first, the paratroopers came under no resistance and liberated Holland. Greetings, beer, women, all of this. But the Allies did not anticipate the strength of the German forces. They retreated a little bit, but were able to gather themselves, and they launched successful counterattacks on the Allies, inducing heavy casualties. Although the Allies did not claim victory, they would later take the area and push the Germans back. once again, I couldn't get dead counts, but I got the casualty counts for both. So this include dead, missing, wounded, everything. So for American and British, it was 15,326, and for Germans, it was 13,000. And the struggles of Market Garden were a prelude to what was to come in the Ardennes Forest. Battle of the Bulge. The Bulge would be the bloodiest battle the Americans would fight in World War II. Become one of the worst winters in United States military history, almost as bad as Valley Forge in the American Revolution. Worse for the casualty rate. The Bulge was the last major offensive campaign of the Germans of World War II. On December 16th, 1944, the Americans were caught completely by surprise when Germans broke through the Ardennes Forest, crippling American lines. One division, the 101st Airborne, that's the show Band of Brothers, was completely surrounded for 2 weeks without supplies. And every time they would drop supplies, they would drop it to the Germans. They heroically avoided capture. On January 25th, the Americans broke through the Ardennes in Belgium. 19,000 Americans died and 47,000 were wounded. 60,000 Germans were killed and 100,000 were wounded. That would be the last of the major battles, but the horrors were still to come. The Allies pushed into Germany, they would discover the horrors of the Nazi regime. The Soviets were the first to liberate concentration camps in Europe. The Americans would soon face the horrors firsthand. Dozens of concentration camps containing Jews, POWs, Gypsies, Slavs, and other suspected communists were liberated. Many contained crematoriums. There were death camps and work camps. An estimated 6 million Jews and 5 million others were systematically killed from 1933 to 1945. Hitler's Eagle's Nest. The Americans would skip out on the invasion of Berlin, which was really costly to the Soviets. About 80,000 Soviets died getting Berlin, which is unbelievable because the Battle of Stalingrad, they lost almost 2 million soldiers. They lost 5 million civilians. So it's just unbelievable that they were so determined to really crush the Germans. Here, soldiers enjoyed at Hitler's Eagle's Nest. It was called Kallensteinhaus in German. The Americans would stay around Hitler's Eagle's Nest, favorite vacation spot, for the remainder of World War II and scattered throughout Germany. Um, Here, soldiers enjoyed large liquor collections of Adolf Hitler and brought home trophies from his vacation spot. American soldiers got themselves in a lot of trouble. Soldiers accidentally died from car accidents, shootings, and other related accidents. As many as 50 Americans died with so much time on their hands reflecting the war and alcohol, and they had a little direction on what they should be doing. And in World War II, the nuclear bomb in Hiroshima and Nagasaki would send the Americans from Europe home. Some of these Americans had not seen home for 3 years and had seen many of their fellow soldiers die fighting the Germans. The American lives lost in Europe would be around 200,000, with 500,000 more injured. So basically, it's a couple. These are the bombings of Nagasaki right here and Hiroshima here, and this is an interesting picture. Before I go, I wanted to talk about this. This picture is an iconic photo taken in Times Square, but this soldier did not know this woman. He grabbed her off the street, and essentially it's sexual assault. But different time, different era, right? Anyways, thanks for listening, class. We got a test on this tomorrow, so study up.